Hello, everyone. Tonight we're diving into a story that might start with a whisper, but ends with thunder. Picture this, a quiet cabin in the mountains, golden light spilling from the windows, pine needles rustling in the dusk air. A boy laughs as he plays with his toy cars on the porch. Then, like a cold slap, a woman's voice cuts through it all. She's not your real grandma. You might think you'd cry. You might think you'd walk away. But I didn't. I smiled. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And please drop your city and local time in the comments below. I want to know just how far this story will travel. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a little white noise play in the background, and let's begin tonight's journey together. I was sitting on the porch swing of our rented cabin, sipping lukewarm chamomile tea, watching my grandson Lance reenact a monster truck rally on the deck. He's 8 at that golden age where everything is loud, sticky, and oddly philosophical. And then came Lyra, my daughter-in-law, my favourite antagonist in Pearls. "She's not your real grandma," she said sharply, arms folded as if defending the sanctity of her doorway. Her designer sunglasses were perched on her head, even though the sun had begun its descent behind the trees. Lance paused mid-vroom, confused. "What do you mean, Mum?" Lyra shrugged like it was the weather. "I mean, she's just your dad's mum, not like actual family." I almost dropped my mug. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because I'd been waiting for this moment, like a fisherman with a 3-year-old line in the water, finally feeling the tug. I smiled, not the polite kind, the kind of smile that comes from a place of knowing, a place of ready. Kent, my son, stepped out behind her, phone in hand. "Mom, Lyra's just tired from the drive. Don't take it the wrong way." Of course, he defended her. He always did, like the time she made me sleep on a fold-out couch so the guest room could stay fresh, or served me my dinner on paper plates while everyone else used her wedding china. I'd been collecting these small humiliations like stamps. But today was the final piece of the puzzle. "Oh, I know exactly what she meant," I said, folding my hands in my lap. Lance clambered into my lap, wrapping his little arms around my neck with that fierce, guileless love only children possess. "You're my real grandma. I don't care what she says." That nearly broke me, but I held on because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Lance, come inside and wash up for dinner," Lyra barked. "And don't get dirty sitting on that old couch." I patted his back as he slid off and shuffled inside it. The old couch she referred to, that's where I'd been sleeping during this family vacation I paid for. The cabin, the rental car, the pantry stocked with their favourite snacks. All funded by me, but they thought Kent paid. They always did. Ever since Henry died, my husband, they assumed I had nothing. No income, no assets, no voice, just a frail widow who needed help. They offered me just enough support to feel righteous, but made sure I knew I was a burden. They didn't know the truth, that Henry and I had quietly built a fortune through careful investments, smart real estate plays, and inherited wealth I never once flaunted. I heard Lyra's voice through the screen door. "She's going to ruin dinner. I swear, she just lingers outside for attention." I closed my eyes, inhaling the pine-scented air. Let her talk. Let her bury herself. Huh? My phone buzzed. A text from Richard Morrison, my attorney, all set for tomorrow evening, Want me to prep the trust letters now? Yes. After dinner, I'll signal when. The plan was in motion. Everything I'd quietly orchestrated over the last 3 years, every bank transfer, every false hint of poverty, every family event I couldn't afford, had led here. I stood slowly, my knees reminding me I wasn't 40 anymore, but my spirit felt sharper than ever. Inside, Kent was setting the table. Lyra was plating spaghetti. She gave herself and Kent hearty servings. Lance a decent one, and me a portion so small it looked like a sample at a grocery store demo. "There's more if you want it," she said with that cloying, sharp-edged smile, although, at your age, you don't need much. I smiled back. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. Kent scrolled on his phone while Lyra poured herself wine like it was her second language. Lance chattered about cartoons, and I nodded, storing away each moment. "Nah," he said between forkfuls. "Mum says we might not visit you much anymore. Gas money and stuff." Kent flinched. Lyra's face flushed. "Well," I said evenly, "people make choices. Sometimes the truth comes out in small mouths." The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. When dinner ended, Lyra noisily stacked my plate, clinking it with exaggerated effort. I excused myself and stepped back onto the porch, letting the door creak behind me. The sky was dusky purple now, and the stars blinked into view. I thought about Lance and how his world might soon shift. I thought about Kent, the boy I raised, and how far he'd strayed from kindness. But most of all, I thought about Lyra. She had no idea that tomorrow, in this very cabin, in front of her husband, son, and a very stunned notary public, I'd reveal my will and the fortune. And she would learn sometimes, the woman you think is powerless is just waiting for her moment. And mine was almost here. When I laid down that night on the lumpy fold-out couch, the one with a spring that had been poking my hip for the last 3 nights, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt resolve. My back ached, my legs throbbed, but my mind was alight. You see, pain is temporary. Clarity, that's a blessing. I stared at the low ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of Kent and Lyra getting ready for bed. Their room had a plush, queen-sized mattress and blackout curtains. I, meanwhile, had a blanket that smelled like mildew and a throw pillow with a mystery stain. Oh, and a rolled towel for lumbar support. Lavish. And still I smiled. Because tonight was the last night they'd see me like this. 3 years ago, I made a decision. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic. When Henry passed, we held a modest funeral, closed casket, soft music, sandwiches after. Kent had given a robotic eulogy, and Lyra cried only when people were watching. 2 weeks later, Kent sat me down at my own kitchen table, my elbows still dented from leaning over bills and balancing checkbooks for decades, and said, "Mum, we need to talk about your financial situation." I remember everything about that moment, the light bouncing off the cheap vase, the way Lyra tapped her nails on the table like she was timing contractions. I knew what was coming. They didn't think I could afford the house anymore. They didn't think I should live alone. They thought it was best to downsize, to move into a community, a code word for place we can forget you in. They couched it in concern. You'll make friends. There's bingo nights. It's close to a hospital. But their eyes betrayed them. This was about convenience, not care. And so I agreed. I sold the house. They thought I used the money to move into a rental apartment. In reality, I already owned that apartment building. I'd bought it under a trust name years ago. The checks I wrote for rent were fake. The utilities prepaid through another LLC every time they expressed pity. I smiled and nodded. Oh, it's tight this month, I'd say, but I'll manage. I always do. They stopped inviting me to holidays. It's too far, Mum. Gas is expensive. They switched Christmas dinner to potluck style, then forgot to tell me what to bring. I'd show up with cookies, only to find the table already full of appetizers, main courses, desserts, none of which I was invited to contribute to. Lyra would always be sweet, on the surface. You shouldn't stress yourself baking. Lorna, store-bought is fine for someone like you. Someone like me. The code words were endless. Kent stopped calling weekly, then monthly. Then he only texted when Lyra reminded him. But I wasn't idle. I was watching. Every moment of exclusion, every side-eyed glance, every passive-aggressive remark, I recorded it, not just in my memory, but in a journal, a navy blue moleskin, labelled social observations. I called it research. It kept me sane. Did you know that people's behaviour changes drastically when they think you have nothing to offer? That's not just anecdotal, it's sociological. You strip away power, and you see who clings to empathy and who rushes to abandon it. Lyra had abandoned me before Henry's body had even cooled. She'd always seen me as a placeholder, someone Kent inherited, not someone she married into. I was baggage polite, stubborn, wrinkled baggage. And she made it her quiet mission to push me out of relevance. It started subtly seating arrangements at parties, family photos I was never in, referring to me as Kent's mother rather than mum. Then it escalated no invites to Lance's school events, no calls on my birthday, no mention in the family newsletter she insisted on sending to everyone, including her esthetician. Kent, he went along with it. He saw the direction of the wind and decided it was easier not to fight it. Passive cowardice, dressed as neutrality. But Lance, that boy was my sunbeam. He never needed reminders, never treated me like a leftover. He would draw me pictures, write "I love Nana" in shaky letters, and sneak me his dessert under the table when Lyra wasn't looking, and I guarded those moments like treasure. Because that's what they were, evidence. Evidence that despite everything, there was still good left to preserve. That's why I created the trust. That's why I rewrote my will. $52 million. Every cent accounted for. Divided into complex channels: bonds, real estate, start-up investments, offshore protections, not to hide it, but to ensure it went only to those who earned it not through blood, but through behaviour. Tomorrow night, they would find out. And tonight, I would let them have their final victory, their final illusion that they had successfully put the old woman in her place. From the other room, I heard Lyra laugh, something about my snoring, probably. Kent chuckled too. I imagined them toasting glasses, high on cheap wine and self-satisfaction. But I had a better vintage waiting, one they would taste with bitter regret. I rolled onto my side, trying to find a spot on the mattress that didn't feel like punishment. My knees cracked, my hip twinged, my body felt every year of its age. But my soul was 25 and plotting again. Tomorrow, I'd tell them everything, and when Lyra's face collapsed in confusion, disbelief, and fear, I wouldn't gloat, I wouldn't yell, I'd simply show her the truth. That you don't need a throne to hold power. Sometimes, you just need a seat at the table and the right moment to stand up. Morning arrived the same way it always did in the mountains, quiet, fresh, and indifferent to human drama. The sun crept over the pines like it had somewhere more important to be, and a hummingbird flitted past the porch where I sat, with my chipped mug of instant coffee, pretending not to hear Lyra complain about the lack of oat milk inside. They were all still operating under the illusion that today would be like any other, a final hike, a lazy lunch, and a bland dinner before we packed up tomorrow. The only packing I was doing was for an entirely different destination. Kent stumbled into the kitchen, groggy and checking his phone. He nodded at me through the screen door like I was a helpful neighbour and not his mother. "Morning, Mum." "Morning," I replied, taking a sip of what tasted suspiciously like cardboard and regret. "Sleep well." He yawned in response. Lyra couldn't get comfortable. That mattress is too soft for her back. I resisted the urge to glance at the fold-out couch I'd been assigned for the 4th straight night. Soft mattress. Must be tragic. Lance woke up soon after, bounding down the hallway like an over-caffeinated rabbit. He launched into a hug that nearly spilled my coffee. "Nana, we're going hiking today, right? You promised." "I remember," I said, ruffling his hair, and I brought trail mix, real trail mix, not just the raisins and despair you get in the pre-packed bags. He giggled and ran inside to find his shoes. Lyra emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a silk robe that looked like it belonged in a spa brochure. Her eyes scanned me the way you check for stains on upholstery, discreet but judgmental. "You seem chipper this morning," she said. "Sleep okay on the couch." I smiled, like a queen, if the queen slept on rocks. She laughed too loudly. "Well, just one more night. You can go back to your little place and sleep in your own bed." I didn't bother correcting her. Let her believe I rented that apartment. Let her believe she had the upper hand one more day. After breakfast, Kent had burned the eggs, and Lyra refused to eat them. On principle, we set off for the lake trail. It wasn't particularly long, just over a mile, but I had always made a show of needing rest stops. Today, I kept pace. In fact, I led. "Nana, you're walking fast," Lance called, breathless behind me. "I guess I've been training in secret," I said with a wink. Kent looked alarmed. "You sure you're okay?" "I feel great," I answered honestly, because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't pretending anymore. I didn't need to slow down to maintain their illusion. Today, I got to be myself, and the trail wound through towering pines and opened up to a sparkling lake, its glassy surface reflecting the sky. Lance ran ahead to throw rocks, while Kent and Lyra unpacked their picnic. Fancy spread, folding chairs, a Bluetooth speaker. I got handed a warm water bottle and a seat on a lichen-covered log. Classic. They set up for selfies, Lyra applying lip gloss like a photo shoot was about to break out. "Lance, come sit on Mummy's lap," she cooed. "Let's take a pretty picture." I stood to the side, watching. As always, not invited into the frame, just a backdrop, the family prop. "Want me to take one of the whole group?" I offered with forced cheer. "No thanks," Lyra said quickly. "It's more of a parents and kid kind of shot." "Of course it was." I turned away before they saw the smile that crept across my face. Mantems short eat it. Later, as they ate sandwiches from the cooler, I pulled out my own little bag of snacks, homemade cookies, chewy, rich, dark chocolate and sea salt, the kind Henry used to call dangerous. Lance sniffed the air. What's that? Nana? Just something sweet I brought along. His eyes lit up. Can I have one? Before I could answer, Lyra interjected. Lance, we talked about this. Too much sugar makes you hyper. Remember? It's just one, I said, and he did walk all the way here. She hesitated. I watched her war with her instincts, control or concede. Fine, she said with a pinch smile. One. I handed Lance the cookie and he bit into it with pure joy. This is so good. It's my grandmother's recipe, I said softly. She taught me when I was about your age. We used to bake every Sunday. Lance looked up at me. Can you teach me too? Of course, sweetheart. Any Sunday you want. Lyra stiffened. We'll have to see what our schedule looks like. I caught Kent watching us from his folding chair, something shifting in his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. We stayed by the lake for hours, and when it was finally time to head back, I made my move. I was thinking, I said lightly, maybe I'll cook dinner tonight, something special for our last evening. Oh, we were just going to order pizza, Kent said, already scrolling on his phone. Yeah, Lyra added, easier that way, less mess. I know, I said with a bright tone, but I'd really love to cook. It's been a while since I've had the chance to do something nice for all of you. She narrowed her eyes. You sure that little kitchen can handle it? I'll manage, I said, already planning the ingredients in my head. Trust me. That evening, I drove into town alone, claiming I needed a walk, though I took the rental car. I stopped by a high-end grocery store Lyra had probably never stepped foot in and purchased the best marbled ribeyes, fresh asparagus, garlic, herbs, heavy cream, and imported chocolate. A quiet splurge funded by my own trust account, from one of many bank cards they didn't know existed. When I returned to the cabin, Kent was napping. Lyra was scrolling through home decor apps on her phone, and Lance was building a Lego city in the corner. Smells amazing in here, Kent said groggily, walking into the kitchen as I basted the steak, Just a little something special, I said. He looked impressed. I didn't know you could cook like this. You've never asked. By the time I called them to the table, the meal looked like a magazine spread, linen napkins, proper plates, candles I found in a drawer. Lyra took one look and blinked in confusion. This is fancy. It's a celebration, I said, pouring the wine. The end of a lovely family vacation. As we sat down and began to eat, the silence was thicker than the béarnaise I'd made from scratch. I waited. I let them chew. Then, with a small smile, I set down my fork and folded my napkin. Actually, I said, voice calm and steady, tonight's also the beginning of something. There's something I need to tell you both. Kent's fork paused mid-air. Lyra's wineglass froze at her lips. I met their eyes. Let's talk about honesty. The fork in Kent's hand slowly dropped onto his plate with a clink. Lyra's grip on her wineglass tightened, her knuckles whitening just slightly. Across the table, Lance happily munched on a roasted carrot, oblivious to the growing tension curdling in the air like spoiled cream. Honesty, Kent repeated, trying to sound casual. What about it? I folded my hands neatly in my lap. My voice remained calm, gentle even. I think it's time we drop a few masks, mine included. I let the pause linger. Lyra blinked. You're talking about what exactly her tone was syrupy, but with that telltale sharpness underneath. She was already calculating. I'm talking, I said, picking up the tablet I'd hidden beneath my chair. About the truth, the whole truth, about money, about expectations, about who's really been taking care of whom. I tapped the screen and turned it around so the digital summary of my investment portfolio faced them. Kent leaned in and blinked. Is that 52 million? I said simply, give or take. It's a good month. Lyra let out a short, breathless laugh. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by Lance whispering, That's a really big number. Kent's eyes were locked on the screen, the numbers shifting in real time. But, how I mean what? I took a sip of wine. Your father and I lived modestly. We invested well. We never told anyone. When he passed, I decided not to change that. Why? Kent asked, dazed. I looked between them both, letting the silence swell before I answered, because I wanted to see who you were without the promise of inheritance hanging over your heads. Lyra flinched, her wineglass now forgotten. That's manipulative. No, I replied smoothly. That's illuminating. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You mean to tell me you've been pretending to be poor for the last 3 years, letting us think we were supporting you, letting us adjust our whole lives to accommodate you when you were sitting on this? You weren't supporting me, I said, still seated, still calm. You were tolerating me. There's a difference. Kent rubbed his temples. Mum, why wouldn't you tell us? Because the truth wouldn't have revealed your character, but the illusion did. Lyra scoffed. So this whole thing has been some kind of social experiment? I tilted my head. If it helps, think of it as a stress test. And unfortunately, neither of you passed. Kent's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man who'd just realised the elevator cable snapped. You're angry, I said, standing at last, the tablet still in my hand, and that's understandable. But maybe what really stings is that I saw through you before you saw me. Lyra sat down again, slowly. So what now? She asked, her voice trembling. You rub it in our faces and walk away. No, I said, setting the tablet on the table like a gavel. I lay out the new terms. I reached into my purse and retrieved the folder I had prepared, a soft tan leather one with embossed initials. Richard Morrison had drawn up every document with excruciating precision. This, I said, sliding the folder toward them, is the updated estate plan. Kent blinked. Estate. Yes, and don't worry, it's very fair. I opened the first page, flipping it toward them. All of my assets are placed in a trust for Lance. He will inherit everything on his 25th birthday. Hey. Lyra's jaw tightened, and until then, I continued, there is a set of conditions. Conditions to ensure that the child I love isn't used as leverage or corrupted by entitlement. Kent's brow furrowed. What kind of conditions? Regular contact with me. A meaningful relationship. One not mediated or filtered by you two. If I find out he's being manipulated, restricted, or poisoned against me, I flipped to the next page. The trust dissolves. The money goes to charity. Lyra gasped. That's blackmail. That's a boundary, I corrected. And what about us? Kent asked quietly. You get nothing, I said, almost kindly, except a chance to rebuild a relationship with your mother, if you want it. The room was quiet again, but not stunned this time. This silence was heavy personal. Lance looked up. What's a trust? I walked over and ruffled his hair. It's something that will help you go to college, or start a business, or buy a house, but only if you remember what really matters. Like family, he asked. I smiled, exactly like family. Lyra suddenly stood again, her face pale. This isn't fair. You're right, I said gently, but it is just... The thing is, the money had never been the point. The point was that love shouldn't be transactional, that family shouldn't be defined by who sits at the fancy table, or who brings the best casserole, or who has the best credit score. Family is who shows up, who sees you, who doesn't make you feel like a placeholder. And I was done being invisible. So I set down the last document, my relocation paperwork. I'm moving, 2 hours away, my own home, my own garden, my own peace. Kent's eyes widened. You're leaving? No, I said, gathering my wine glass. I'm arriving into the life I should have had all along. And with that, I stepped away from the table. Tomorrow, we'd eat breakfast and go our separate ways, but nothing would ever be the same again. Lyra didn't faint right away. First, she made a sound half gasp, half wheeze, as if the air had suddenly decided she didn't deserve it. Her eyes darted from the folder to the tablet to me, then back to the folder, as if sheer disbelief might reverse time. You're bluffing, she finally said, voice low and sharp. This is just a scare tactic. You want to embarrass us. Sheesh. I tilted my head, as though considering if I wanted to embarrass you, Lyra. I'd have done it at Christmas dinner last year. You remember that one when you asked me if I could contribute a few dollars for the ham, and then announced I didn't need to bring anything after all because store-bought cookies are more your speed? Kent's eyes flicked toward her, mortified. Lyra swayed a little in her chair, and then down she went, like a puppet with its strings cut. She hit the floor with a soft thud, wineglass slipping from her fingers and landing sideways, sending a dark red stream toward the table leg. Kent leapt up. Lyra, Lyra. He dropped to his knees beside her, patting her cheek. Come on, wake up! Lance looked up from his plate, eyes wide. Mommy. I walked around the table, crouched down, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. She's okay, sweetheart. Just a little surprised. I didn't mean to sound so calm, but when someone spends 3 years treating you like forgotten furniture, you tend to run out of panic when they hit the floor over their own hubris. Eventually, Lyra's eyelids fluttered. What happened? She murmured. Kent helped her sit up slowly. You fainted. Her eyes found me, and all at once, she remembered. The money, she whispered. Yes, I said, still standing. It's real. She grabbed the edge of the chair and pulled herself upright, wobbly but awake. You lied to us. No, I replied gently. I simply never corrected your assumptions. You saw me struggling, and you didn't ask questions. You saw me excluded, and you looked the other way. Kent stood too, but didn't say anything. His silence now felt more like shame than avoidance. Lance tugged my sleeve. Nana, why is everyone acting weird? I smiled at him. Because sometimes, when people learn something unexpected, they need a moment to adjust. He nodded solemnly, like when I found out dogs can't eat chocolate. Exactly like that. Lyra sank back into her chair. She picked up her napkin and began dabbing at her damp forehead. Her lipstick was smeared and her pride crumpled. So, what, you're just going to cut us off unless we agree to your rules? I'm not cutting you off, I said. You're still part of the family, but access to my estate that's earned. Through what Kent asked, his voice hoarse, jumping through hoops, performing affection. No. Through respect, I said firmly, through consistent, thoughtful behaviour, through treating me like a person instead of a burden. He looked down at the table, shame softening the edges of his face. Lyra glanced at the documents again, her voice sharper this time. And what if we say no? I poured myself another small glass of wine. Then Lance still inherits everything on his 25th birthday. You'll get nothing, and every year between now and then, you'll have to explain to him why his grandmother isn't around. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lance, still processing, said quietly, I don't want you to go, Nana. I crouched beside him. I don't want to go either, sweetheart. That's why I made sure we'd always have a way to stay connected, no matter what happens. But Mum, he looked between us. She'll be okay, I said. Sometimes grown-ups just need time to figure out what kind of people they want to be. I could feel Lyra bristling from across the table, but she didn't interrupt. Not this time. Kent rubbed his eyes. I don't even know what to say. I rose, calm and sure, then don't say anything yet. Sleep on it. Digest. Just like this dinner. There was still dessert, a dense chocolate torte I'd made that morning with ingredients no struggling widow could ever justify. I served it anyway. No one spoke as we ate. The room was filled only with the soft scrape of forks and the occasional sigh of Lance delighting in chocolate. As we finished, I set down my fork and looked between the two adults who had once held so much power over me. Tomorrow morning, I said, we leave. You'll go back to your house, your routines, your story of the poor mother-in-law who just needed managing. But that story ends here. From this point forward, there will be new rules, and they won't be made behind my back. I saw Lyra swallow hard. And I won't chase you, I added. If you want to be in my life, you'll have to show up. If you want Lance to understand the value of unconditional love, then you'll have to demonstrate it. No more tests, just choices. The air felt thinner, somehow charged, electric, brimming with consequences. I stood, taking the now empty dessert plates with me. Kent reached as if to help, but stopped halfway. A reflex, a maybe, still not a decision. That was fine. He had until morning. And I had never felt more awake. I didn't sleep much that night. But not because of nerves or doubt, no. I was finally free of those. I stayed up rereading the documents one more time, each page, a quiet declaration of boundaries, long overdue. Then I closed the folder and let it rest beside my small suitcase. Funny how little you need when you've been made to feel like a guest in your own family. At dawn, I was already up, sitting on the porch with a warm cup of tea when I heard the creak of the screen door behind me. Kent stood there in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, rubbing the back of his neck like a teenage boy caught breaking curfew. Couldn't sleep either, I asked. He shook his head. Not really. I patted the seat beside me. To my surprise, he took it. For a long time, we sat without speaking, watching the sun rise over the treetops. It was a quiet kind of beautiful, the kind Henry used to call God's apology for long winters. Eventually, Kent cleared his throat. I don't know what to say. I sipped my tea. You don't have to say anything if you're not ready. I mean, I should be angry, he said, staring out at the trees, that you hid the money, that you let us think you were broke, that you watched us make decisions around you like we were running a tight ship. You weren't running anything, I said, not unkindly. You were drifting, and I was too, until I realised I didn't want to be cargo anymore. He winced at that. I never wanted to make you feel like you didn't belong. I turned to look at him, but you didn't want to fight for me to belong, either. He looked down. You're right. For a few minutes, we let the birds do the talking. I guess I just didn't know how to balance it all, he admitted. Lyra, she's strong. She has expectations. And when we got married, she made it clear that we were going to do things our way. I thought going along with it was easier than pushing back. Easier isn't always better, I said softly. Sometimes it's just quiet neglect. He nodded slowly. I know. I see that now. I reached over and placed my hand over his. I don't hate you, Kent. I never could. You're still my son, but I won't beg to be seen anymore. I don't want you to, he said. I want to do better. I gave his hand a squeeze, then let go, then start with Lance. Show him what it looks like when a man acknowledges where he went wrong. Just then, the door creaked again, and Lance stepped out, sleepy-eyed and wrapped in a blanket like a burrito. Nana. I opened my arms, and he climbed right in. He was growing so fast. His feet dangled farther than they used to, but his trust, his love that was still small and pure. Are you leaving today? He asked, muffled against my shoulder. I am, I said, but I'll visit soon, and if your parents let you, you can visit me too. I want to, he said. I want to help in your garden and make cookies. I'd love that. Kent watched the exchange, something in his expression softening even more. Lyra didn't come out until after breakfast, her eyes puffy and guarded. She didn't say much, just watched me pack, her arms crossed like a wall. That was fine. She didn't need to say anything yet. Words without action meant nothing. By 9 a.m., my ride had arrived, a sleek black sedan from a car service I'd prearranged under my trust name. The look on Lyra's face as she watched the driver open the door for me, priceless. Kent carried my suitcase down the steps. You sure you don't want to ride with us to the airport? I have a different destination, I said, smiling. He nodded like he understood that meant more than just geography. Lance ran down the steps and hugged me tight. Bye, Nana. Not goodbye, I whispered. Just see you later. Lyra approached slowly. So, what happens now? I met her gaze head on. Now, you decide. You decide if you want me in your life because you care, or because you're afraid of what's at stake. She looked away, but said, I'll think about it. That's all I ask. I got into the car and shut the door. The engine purred to life. As the car pulled away from the cabin, I didn't look back. Instead, I looked forward toward my new home, my new garden, my new chapter. Toward a life where I was no longer tolerated. I was valued. And I would never settle for less again. The drive into town was quiet. No radio, no small talk, just the hum of the tyres on the mountain road and the trees blurring by like a lifetime of silence finally falling away. I leaned back against the seat and let it all wash over me. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Everything all right, Mum?" I gave him a tired smile. Everything's finally honest. He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. Sometimes strangers recognize the look of someone who's just set themselves free. We arrived at the little craftsman bungalow I had purchased 6 months ago under a different name, my grandmother's maiden name. It had a wraparound porch, a swing I'd already tested, and a patch of earth in the backyard that I knew would be perfect for dahlias in spring and heirloom tomatoes in summer. It wasn't a palace, but it was mine, paid in full, untouched by anyone else's expectations. The driver carried my suitcase to the porch, and I thanked him, tipped him well, and waved him off. I stood there alone for a long moment, watching the car disappear down the hill, then turned to face the little white house. Home. I stepped inside and was greeted by soft afternoon light filtering through linen curtains. I had furnished the place simply warm woods, shelves filled with books I actually read, a cosy armchair that didn't fold out into anything. I lit a cinnamon candle and stood in the middle of the room, letting the scent fill the space. For the first time in years, no one would ask me to move over. No one would talk over me. No one would cancel my seat. I wandered into the kitchen, pulled out my handwritten recipe box, and started a list of groceries. If Lance visited, I'd need flour, chocolate chips, and blueberries. He loved them in muffins. Later that afternoon, I called Richard Morrison, my lawyer. "It's done," I said when he answered. "And the documents?" "In their hands." There was a brief pause. "You all right, Nain?" I looked around my sunlit kitchen. "I'm good, Richard. Better than I've been in years. I'll finalise the trust registration with the court this week. Everything's enforceable now. Are you sure you want to give them the option to repair things?" "I am," I said softly, "because I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it out of self-respect." He chuckled. "You've always had that in spades. They just didn't recognise it. Now they don't have a choice." We hung up, and I spent the rest of the evening unpacking. It didn't take long turns out when you spend years minimising yourself. You learn to travel light. A few days passed quietly. I read, I cooked, I walked down the lane each morning and waved to neighbours I didn't know yet. The local librarian, a woman named June, had already invited me to join the Tuesday morning book club. I said yes without hesitation. Then, one morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Kent standing there, awkward and alone, holding a pie. It was misshapen, the crust uneven, the filling leaking out one side. I stared at it. "Peach," he said, sheepish. "I tried to make the kind you used to bring to the lake house." I stepped aside to let him in. He set the pie down on the counter and looked around. "It's beautiful here." "Thank you." He turned toward me, his voice suddenly more serious. "I talked to Lyra. A lot, actually. I think we both needed to hear what you said, even if it hurt." I waited. He took a breath. I was wrong. About so much. About letting her take the lead on how we treated you. About not stepping up. I got caught in this idea that family had to look a certain way, that being polite was enough. And now, I see that polite without respect is just cowardice. That made me pause. He looked down at the pie. She's still working through it, but she knows the money isn't what matters anymore. Does she? She's not the villain, Mum, but she has blind spots, ones we both let grow. I nodded, accepting that answer for now. Lance keeps asking when he can visit. We told him soon. I'd like that, I said, finally softening. Kent hesitated, and me. I looked at my son, not the man who had ignored my needs for 3 years, but the boy I once taught how to ride a bike. The teenager I stayed up with when his heart broke for the first time. The young man I supported through college even when money was tight. I'd like that too, I whispered. We sat in the kitchen and shared a slice of lopsided pie. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The following Saturday, I heard the crunch of tyres on my gravel drive again. This time, it wasn't Kent. It was Lance and Lyra. I froze for just a second, watching from behind the living room curtain. Lyra had dressed neatly, almost modestly, a soft blouse and jeans. No diamond earrings or flashy nails. Lance bounded out of the car with the joyful energy only children possess, his backpack bouncing and his arms already wide open. Nana, he shouted, racing toward the house. I opened the door before he could even knock. He launched into my arms, nearly knocking the wind out of me. You came, I whispered into his hair. I brought my bug collection and my storybook and my cookie apron. Behind him, Lyra approached slowly. She didn't have the same brash stride she used to carry. There was a hesitance, an uncertainty in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Hi, Nayen, she said, her voice soft and tentative. Hello? Lyra. We stood in silence for a moment. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, she said, her arms crossed not in defiance, but self-protection. But I wanted to bring Lance myself and talk, if you'll let me. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked through the doorway like it might bite her. The house was warm, the scent of banana bread wafting from the kitchen, and Lance was already darting around, pointing out all the things he loved, look-real flowers and books and a rocking chair. Lyra sat on the edge of the couch like she wasn't sure if she had the right to get comfortable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. I grew up very different from Kent. We didn't have generational wealth. I watched my mum fight for everything she had, and I told myself I'd never depend on anyone. I'd build my own version of safety, and when I married Kent, I thought we were doing just that. And I was a threat to that. I said. She looked at me, not flinching. Yes, I thought you were the reminder that there were parts of his life I couldn't control. You knew him before me. You had a hold on him that I didn't understand, and I didn't want to compete. You weren't supposed to. I know that now. We sat for a moment in that difficult truth. I'm sorry, she finally said, for everything, for the things I said, for the way I treated you, for the way I raised Lance to see you as an obligation, not a blessing. I studied her. Do you mean that, or is this about the inheritance? Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I mean it because I saw the look on my son's face when you told him you were leaving. He didn't care about the money. He just didn't want to lose you. And I saw the disappointment, not in you, in me. I nodded slowly. I'm not asking for access to the trust. I'm not asking for your money. I'm just asking for a chance to show you I can be better. In the next room, Lance was lining up toy animals along the windowsill, humming quietly to himself. I never hated you. Lyra, I said gently, but I also never really knew you, because you only ever showed me the version of yourself that needed to dominate the room. She looked away, ashamed. Let's try again, I offered. You as you are, me as I am, no games. She nodded, lips trembling. Later that day, I took Lance into the backyard and we planted tulip bulbs. He loved pressing the soft earth down over them, as though tucking them in for a long nap. What colour will they be? He asked. Red, yellow, purple. They'll surprise us. I hope one is orange. Mummy says that's the happiest colour. I smiled. Then maybe the garden will be happier next spring. We spent the afternoon baking cookies, Lance dancing around in his apron while Lyra chopped walnuts at the counter beside me. It was awkward at first, but then it just wasn't. We were tired women who'd both loved the same little boy enough to come to the table again. Before they left, Lyra hesitated at the door. Would it be okay if I came with Lance next weekend? Just me and him. We could bring lunch. I looked at her for a long moment. That would be fine. And it truly would be. Because what I wanted all along wasn't revenge. It wasn't even respect. It was connection, one that wasn't built on guilt or control. And maybe, just maybe, we were finally starting to build that. 6 weeks passed, not a long time in the grand scheme of life, but long enough for things to take root: habits, trust, and conversations that weren't centered around money or obligation. Every Saturday, without fail. Lance arrived just after 10 with a big smile and a new drawing in hand. Sometimes Lyra came with him, sometimes it was Kent, and sometimes they both came, bringing lunch or flowers or homemade bread, tentative gestures in place of words they still hadn't quite figured out how to say. And me, I watched it all unfold, not with suspicion, but with a cautious kind of hope. I'd spent so long living small, tiptoeing around their moods, shrinking myself to fit into the spaces they allowed. Now, the space was mine, and they, Kent and Lyra, were learning how to fit themselves into my life. The power dynamic had shifted, not just because of the money, but because I no longer feared their disapproval. That changed everything. One morning, while Lance and I were arranging daffodils in a jar for the dining table, Lyra was sitting nearby, flipping through a magazine. The article was about estate planning and legacy giving. I saw her eyes drift toward the envelope I kept on the corner of the counter, the one labelled Trust Documents. I didn't move it. I didn't hide it. Eventually, she said, you haven't changed anything in the will, have you? I shook my head. Not yet. Her hands tightened around the magazine. Do you think we've changed? I looked at her, really looked. There was a rawness there, but also humility and effort. You're trying, I said. She nodded. I know I have a long way to go. Trying matters. It always has. That was the whole point of the test. Lyra looked away, her jaw tight. I hated that test. I know, I replied. It wasn't for punishment. It was for clarity, yours and mine. She was quiet for a while. Then she said something I hadn't expected. My mother was never around. She worked 2 jobs, had 5 relationships by the time I was a teenager. I was alone a lot. And I told myself when I built my own family, I'd never feel small again. I'd be in control. I'd be respected. And somewhere along the way, respect started to look like domination, I said softly. She nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I know, I said. Later that evening, after they left, I sat alone on the porch. The wind had a bite to it, and I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders. I watched the stars appear one by one, blinking through the dark like hesitant apologies. I thought of Henry, how he used to say forgiveness wasn't a finish line, it was a garden, something you had to keep tending, pull weeds, water roots, watch what grows. I didn't know if I could ever love Lyra the way I once wanted to, but I knew she was trying to plant something new. And that was enough for now. A week later, Richard called. Nyan, he said, just a reminder that the window for amending the trust closes this quarter. You still want Lance as the sole inheritor. I do, I said without hesitation, but add one clause. I'm listening. If, before Lance turns 18, both his parents demonstrate long-term, good faith care for me, he can split the trust evenly with them. If not, it reverts fully to him on his 25th birthday. There was a pause. You're giving them a second chance, Richard said. I'm giving them room to prove who they want to be. He smiled on the other end. I'll draft it. Want a clause for revocation. No. Let them live with the knowledge that I believed in them more than they believed in me. He laughed. Savage grace. I like it. Call it what you want, I said. Just put it in ink. That weekend, Lance stayed the night for the first time. We made cinnamon rolls from scratch and played card games by candlelight when the power blinked off during a storm. As we curled up on the couch beneath a quilt, he looked at me with sleepy eyes. Nana. Yes, baby. Mum said you're not really my grandma, but you feel like mine. Tears filled my eyes. Oh, Lance, I whispered, stroking his hair. I'm really yours, in all the ways that count. He nodded once, then drifted off, his small hand still wrapped around mine. And I knew in that moment whatever happened with Kent or Lyra, this boy, this pure little soul would carry forward the truth of what family really means. Love, not blood. Effort, not entitlement. And I would keep planting one Saturday at a time. Spring came like a slow breath-warm rain, soft buds on the trees, birds chirping earlier each day. My tulips bloomed first, then the daffodils, and finally the roses I'd planted in the corner of the yard where Henry used to keep his weathered bench. I replaced it with a new one, pale blue with iron arms, sturdy enough for memory and peace to sit together. Lance came every weekend without fail. He brought drawings, school projects, stories from recess, and sometimes even poems. One morning, he ran up the walkway, waving a folded paper like a victory flag. I wrote you a letter, Nana, he shouted. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it carefully. It read, Dear Nana, you are my bestest friend. You are not fake. You are real. You make cookies. You don't yell. You love me and I love you. Even when I grow big, I'll still come over. I won't forget. Love, Lance. I had to sit down. That letter. It meant more than any bank statement or legal document ever could, because it was earned, not inherited. Later that week, Kent came by with his toolbox and a nervous energy I hadn't seen in years. Thought I'd fix that squeaky porch step, he said. You remembered. I remember a lot more now, he said, bending down to unscrew the warped wood. We spent the morning together, side by side in companionable quiet. Afterward, I poured us lemonade, and we sat in the shade. I used to think money was the reward, he said, but I was wrong. The real reward is being let back in. I didn't respond right away. I just watched the way the sunlight caught the silver creeping into his hair. You're earning your way back, I finally said. Slowly, but surely. That night, I updated a folder in my desk drawer. I added a note to the trust file. To Lance, if one day you read this, know that everything I did was not to punish, but to protect. You were my anchor. You reminded me who I was when others tried to make me forget, and no matter what the papers say, you are my family. Then I locked it, content. The very next weekend, something unexpected happened. Lyra showed up alone. She wore jeans and a windbreaker, no makeup, her hair in a loose ponytail. In her hands was a small potted plant lavender, my favourite. I wanted to bring you something, she said. I remembered you once told Lance that lavender keeps away the sadness. I blinked, surprised. Can I help you plant it? She asked, looking nervous. We worked in the garden together, not speaking much, just digging, patting soil, letting the sun do the talking. After we finished, we sat on the porch, sipping tea. I'm not going to pretend it's all fixed, she said, but I also won't pretend I didn't make it worse. That's a good place to start, I said. I used to think being right was more important than being kind, but you showed me quietly that it's the other way around. I glanced sideways at her. And does it feel better? She gave a crooked smile. It feels real, which is new for me. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But when she left that afternoon, I found a note tucked into the lavender's pot. Thank you for not giving up on me. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Lance sees how a woman changes, not just controls. I smiled. In May, I threw a small garden party, just a few neighbours, a picnic table full of lemonade and finger foods, and a sign that read, Bloom where you're planted. Kent came. Lyra brought blueberry scones, and Lance, he brought his orange tulip he'd picked himself. As the party wound down and neighbours drifted home, Lance climbed onto the bench beside me and leaned his head on my shoulder. Did you know, he whispered, some people at school said you weren't my real grandma. Oh. But I told them that's not true. I told them you're the grandma of my heart. I swallowed hard. And they said that's better than just blood. He was right. That night, as the stars returned to their posts in the sky, I thought about how close I'd come to disappearing, how easily I could have let their rejection bury me. But instead, I chose to root myself deeper. I didn't need to be anyone's real grandma. I just needed to be the one who showed up, who stayed, who loved fiercely and gently and on her own terms. And somehow, that made me more real than anything.